I am Sierra, age 32. And for most of my life, I truly believed I was adopted, a charity case taken in by a kind couple who had already given their hearts and attention to their real children. I grew up inside a house that looked warm from the outside. White walls, flower pots by the door, the smell of my mother's perfume floating in the hallway. But inside, it was colder than any winter I've ever known. I was never called daughter, not once. To them, I was the girl who helps around. My mother, if I can even call her that, would say, "Sierra, take the plates. Sierra, clean the floor. Sierra, your siblings are tired and can you do their laundry?" When I was little, I used to smile and say, "Okay," because I thought that's how love worked. I thought that by being good, by being useful, maybe they'd see me. Maybe they'd say, "You're part of us." But that moment never came. My brother and sister, Mason and Lily, were treated like royalty. Every morning before school, my mother would lay out their clothes neatly on their beds, their shoes polished, breakfast steaming hot. Meanwhile, I was told to make my own food and then clean the kitchen afterward. I'd watch Mason complain about his eggs being slightly too runny, and my mother would rush to fix them. If I ever dared to say I was hungry, she'd hand me leftovers, as if I was lucky to even have those. I used to wonder why they even kept me around. At night, I would lie on the thin mattress in the storage room, that was my room, and stare at the ceiling, wondering if real parents were supposed to make you feel invisible. There were no photos of me in the living room. No birthday candles, no gifts. When guests came over, I'd be told, "Go to the kitchen. Stay out of the way." The word family always had a strange taste in my mouth. Something bitter, something that didn't quite belong to me. When I was about 12, I remember asking once, "Why don't I look like you?" My hair was darker, my eyes were brown when theirs were a pale blue, and my skin always seemed to carry a warmer tone. My father looked up from his newspaper and said, "Because you're not really one of us, Sierra. We took you in. You should be grateful." That word, grateful, became the leash they tied around my neck. Every act of kindness I gave, every chore I did, every sacrifice I made, it was never enough because I owed them. For what? I never really understood. By the time I turned 16, I stopped asking questions. I became quiet. I accepted that I wasn't family. I was staff, the maid who happened to share their last name. When guests visited, my mother would smile and brag about Mason's grades, Lily's ballet recitals, and then, when they'd ask about me, she'd say with a dismissive laugh, "Oh, Sierra's our helper. She keeps things running." As if that was something to be proud of. But something inside me, something small and stubborn, refused to die. I studied in secret. I would read the old books Mason left behind. I'd stay up late, pretending to fold laundry, but actually copying down words from his school notes. I wanted to be more than what they saw. I wanted to prove that I mattered. It wasn't easy. They mocked me for trying. Mason would say, "Why do you even bother studying? You'll just end up cleaning someone else's mess." Lily would laugh and say, "You're not even really one of us. You're just around again," and still I kept going. At 17, I got my first job, part-time at a diner. The owner, Mrs. Hill, was a kind woman with tired eyes and a voice that carried both wisdom and pain. She used to say, "You've got that quiet strength, Sierra. Don't let anyone dim that." I didn't tell her about home. I just nodded and smiled. But she must have seen it in my eyes, the way I carried myself, like someone who had learned to shrink to fit into small spaces. Years passed like that. Work, home, silence. Every time I brought home a little money, my mother would take it for the household. She'd say, "Don't forget who feeds you," and I would hand it over, even when it meant skipping lunch for a week. When I turned 21, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way they looked at me, like I was an unpaid debt they couldn't wait to collect on. I decided to move out, but they wouldn't let me. "You owe us," my father said, "after all we've done for you." "What have you done for me?" I asked quietly. He slapped me. That was the last time I cried in that house. I left that night with a backpack, a few clothes, and a small photograph I'd found once in an old drawer. A picture of me as a baby, held by a woman I didn't recognize. I didn't know why I kept it. Something about her eyes, kind but sad, pulled at me. I had no proof, but deep down, I felt that maybe, just maybe, she was my real mother. I moved to another city, got a job as a receptionist, then worked my way up to assistant manager in a small firm. I found peace in routine, in quiet mornings with coffee, in walking home through the city lights, in the simple joy of knowing I didn't have to ask anyone's permission to exist. For years, I didn't think about them much. My parents, my so-called family, they didn't reach out and I didn't either. The silence suited us both. Then one day, I got a call from Lily. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly a decade. "Grandpa passed away," she said flatly. My heart sank a little. Not because I was close to him. In truth, I barely knew the man. But he was the only one who had ever shown me small kindnesses. When I was a child, he would sometimes slip me a cookie under the table or whisper, "You're stronger than you think, little one." I didn't understand it then. But now, those words echoed in me. So I decided to go to the funeral. Not out of obligation, but maybe to say goodbye to the only person in that family who ever saw me as human. The day of the funeral was gray and windy, the kind of day where the clouds seem to hang low, as if the sky itself is mourning. When I arrived, I could feel the stares. Mason, now a polished businessman, gave me a quick nod but said nothing. Lily pretended not to notice me. My parents, both older now, their faces hardened by years of pride and bitterness, looked at me like a ghost who had wandered in uninvited. "Why are you here?" my mother asked coldly. I took a deep breath. "To pay my respects." She scoffed but said nothing more. I sat quietly near the back, away from the rows reserved for family. The room was filled with soft murmurs, the sound of tissues, and the dull scent of lilies. As the service went on, I felt detached, as though I were watching my past dissolve in front of me. I thought that would be the end of it, that I'd say goodbye, walk away and never look back again. But life, it seems, had other plans. After the ceremony, as everyone began to leave, a woman approached me. She was in her 50s, dressed simply, but her presence carried a strange weight, a quiet intensity that made me pause. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt something stir. Familiarity, maybe. She stepped closer and said softly, "You're Sierra, right?" I nodded. She glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. Then she leaned in and whispered, "You were not adopted." My heart froze. Before I could speak, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, slightly yellowed with age. She pressed it into my hand. "Your real parents never stopped searching for you," she said quietly. "You were taken from them, kidnapped." I stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Read these," she said, nodding to the envelope. "Newspaper clippings, from 30 years ago." Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes and added, "The reward now tops $91 million. I stood there frozen, the words echoing in my mind. Kidnapped. Real parents, reward. Before I could ask more, she walked away, disappearing into the crowd of black suits and umbrellas. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were 3 old clippings, yellowed, creased, but still legible. One headline read, "Infant girl abducted from family estate. Parents offer. 10 million reward." Another. Desperate search enters. 3rd year, hope, fading for missing baby Sierra Callahan. My breath caught in my throat. Callahan. I had never heard that name before. But there, under the photo, blurry, black and white, was a baby with dark hair and brown eyes. My eyes. The ground beneath me seemed to shift. All those years. All those cruel words, the chores, the isolation, the endless guilt of feeling unwanted. None of it was because I was adopted. It was because I was stolen. And the people who stole me were the ones I had called Mom and Dad. I sat down on the nearest bench, gripping those papers, my mind spinning between disbelief and rage. Everything I had ever known about my life had just shattered, like glass hit by a silent bullet. And in that moment, under that gray, heavy sky, I made myself a promise. Calm, cold, and absolute. They had stolen my childhood, my name, my identity. But I was going to take something back. Not through violence. Not through screaming, but through truth, and through calm, deliberate revenge. I sat on that bench long after the funeral ended, the rain starting to drizzle over the cemetery path. The crowd had thinned, and soon only the sound of water tapping against the umbrellas remained. My hands trembled around the newspaper clippings, and I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from what I had just learned. Kidnapped. That word alone felt too heavy to fit inside my head. For 32 years, I had lived as someone else's shadow. I had scrubbed their floors, washed their dishes, bowed my head to their commands, believing I was lucky to even have a home. But all along, I had been living inside a lie so big it stole not just my childhood, but my entire identity. When the rain turned heavier, I walked back to my car and sat there in silence. I couldn't drive. My thoughts were a storm on their own. The woman's words echoed in my head. Your real parents never stopped searching for you. Who was she? How did she know me? And what did she mean by, reward now tops $91 million? It sounded insane, impossible. But those clippings were real, yellowed, brittle, and carrying the weight of time. The baby in the photograph looked exactly like me. Even the birthmark under her left ear, small like a faded teardrop, was there. I remember touching the spot behind my ear as a child and asking my mother where it came from. She'd said, "It's nothing. Just a stain." A stain? No, it was proof. I drove home slowly, the windshield wipers smearing raindrops into thin streaks. My apartment was quiet when I entered, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. I placed the envelope on my dining table and stared at it for a long time. I knew I needed answers, but where would I even start? For the first time in years, I decided to look up my last name, or rather, the name in the article. Sierra Callahan. When I typed it into the search bar, I half expected nothing. Maybe an old case file or a random news mention, but what came up made my breath stop. There were dozens of results. News articles, documentaries, even online forums. The Callahan kidnapping, still unsolved. After 32 years, billionaire couple's infant daughter, abducted from home, massive reward, still active. Search for missing Callahan, heiress continues. I scrolled, heart pounding. There were photos of the family, the Callahans, taken through the years. A tall man with kind eyes and a woman with gentle features that seemed hauntingly familiar. There was an older photo. The two of them standing in front of a mansion, holding a baby. The same baby from the clipping. The same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. I felt dizzy. I got up, splashed water on my face, then returned to the screen. Every article told the same story. The Callahans were one of the wealthiest families in the state, known for their philanthropy, their businesses, and their tragedy. Their only daughter was kidnapped at 8 months old by a woman posing as a nanny. The investigation went cold after 2 years. No suspects were ever found. But the parents never gave up. They spent millions on private investigators, kept the story alive in the media, and even increased the reward to keep people searching. Over time, the case had become a symbol of loss, a reminder of how even the most powerful can't escape heartbreak. And all that time, I had been mopping floors for my kidnappers. I sat back, my chest tight, tears spilling without warning. Not loud, sobbing tears, just quiet ones. The kind that burn your eyes and make it hard to breathe. My mind kept looping back to small moments. My father's short temper. My mother's constant control. The way they never wanted anyone asking about my childhood. It all made sense now. They had something to hide. But why? Why kidnap a baby and then raise her as a servant? What kind of twisted satisfaction came from that? I needed to know the truth. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went back to the cemetery. I didn't know who that woman was, but I hoped she'd be there again. Maybe lingering, watching from afar. She wasn't. I stood there for almost an hour, scanning faces until a groundskeeper approached and asked if I needed help. I said no, thanked him, and walked away, the wind tugging at my coat. Then I noticed something. Tucked inside the envelope, something I hadn't seen before, was a small folded note. It must have slipped between the clippings. My hands shook as I opened it. In neat handwriting it said, "If you want the truth, meet me at Willow Cafe, Thursday, 4 p.m. No name. No phone number. Just that. It was Tuesday. The next 2 days felt endless. I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every time I looked at those clippings, my stomach twisted with a mix of fear and fury. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? "Hi, I think I was kidnapped 3 decades ago." It sounded like a bad movie. By Thursday, I was exhausted but determined. I wore a simple gray coat and tied my hair back. The Willow Cafe was a small, quiet place downtown, the kind that smelled like roasted beans and rain-soaked pavement. When I walked in, my eyes scanned the tables. She was there, the woman from the funeral, sitting near the window, a cup of tea untouched in front of her. She looked up, met my gaze, and nodded once. I sat down. "You came," she said softly. "I had to," I replied. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Who are you?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "My name is Evelyn. I worked for your real parents. I was their housekeeper when you were taken." Her voice trembled slightly. "That day, it destroyed them." I swallowed hard. "How do you know it was them who took me? The people I grew up with?" Evelyn looked down, then pulled a photograph from her purse, a faded picture of 2 women standing in a garden. One of them was Evelyn herself. The other was my mother. "She used to come by the Callahan house often," Evelyn said. "She said she was helping with errands, sometimes watching you for short periods. She gained everyone's trust." My hands went cold. "The day you were taken," Evelyn continued, "she was there. She offered to put you down for your nap. When we checked later, you were gone. She disappeared the same day." I stared at the table, my pulse pounding. "So they—" "Yes," Evelyn said softly. "They took you. They moved towns, changed their names, started over, and they raised you to believe you were their responsibility, not their crime." I felt a lump in my throat. "Why didn't anyone find me?" Evelyn sighed. "Your father was clever. He forged documents, even managed to falsify adoption papers. The investigation had holes back then. No digital records, no advanced tracking. They slipped through." "And my real parents?" I whispered. Her eyes softened. "They never stopped looking. They're old now. Your mother, she still lights a candle every year on your birthday." Tears filled my eyes again. I looked away, pretending to focus on the window. Cars passed. People laughed outside. The world kept moving, completely unaware that mine had just stopped. I took a deep breath. "Why tell me now?" Evelyn hesitated. "Your grandfather's passing brought people out who hadn't seen each other in years. When I saw you at the funeral, I knew. You looked just like your real mother when she was your age. I couldn't keep quiet anymore." I nodded slowly, letting the truth settle like dust after a storm. "Will they believe me?" I asked finally. "DNA doesn't lie," she said simply. I left the cafe in silence, clutching the clippings like they were a part of me. The city air felt heavy, every sound sharper than usual. That night I sat at my kitchen table and searched again. This time, I found a foundation, the Callahan Missing Persons Fund. There was a contact email. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing. Hello, my name is Sierra. I believe I may be the daughter you lost. Then I stopped, deleted the sentence, rewrote it, deleted again. What if it wasn't true? What if Evelyn was mistaken? But deep down, I already knew. The next morning, I went to a private DNA testing center. I mailed the sample to the Callahan Foundation under a pseudonym, asking for verification. Waiting for those results was the hardest part. Each day felt like walking on glass, knowing that at any moment, my whole existence might be rewritten. I still went to work, smiled at coworkers, went through the motions. But inside, I was a storm. 3 weeks later, I got an email. DNA match, 99.98%. Probability, parent-child relationship confirmed. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. There it was. Proof. I was Sierra Callahan, the lost daughter of the family I'd read about. The people I had called Mom and Dad were criminals, and as the truth settled in, something in me shifted. Not rage. Not grief, just clarity. I wasn't going to destroy them violently. They didn't deserve my anger. They deserved consequences. Cold, quiet, deliberate. Revenge, yes, but calm. Because now I held something far more powerful than hate. I held truth, and I was going to use it carefully. The day I got that email, my world went completely still. Not in chaos, not in panic, but in the kind of silence that comes right before something enormous begins. The DNA results glowed on my laptop screen like they were written in fire. 99.98% parent-child relationship confirmed. It was undeniable. I was Sierra Callahan, the missing daughter of Richard and Helena Callahan. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen. I should have felt joy, relief, vindication. But what I actually felt was something colder, something steady. I felt power. For 32 years, they'd taken everything from me, my childhood, my name, even my sense of worth. But now, I held the truth in my hands, and truth, when used carefully, could be sharper than any weapon. I closed the laptop slowly and whispered to myself, "It's time." The first step was to learn everything I could about both families, the Callahans and the people who stole me. That night, I started researching deeper. Richard and Helena Callahan were still alive, though in their late 60s now. They had largely withdrawn from public life, but their foundation was still active, providing aid to missing children's families. They'd turned their pain into purpose. Reading that broke something inside me. The people who had truly loved me had spent their lives trying to find me, while I was scrubbing floors for the monsters who had stolen me from them. As for the kidnappers, the people I'd grown up calling Mom and Dad, their lives had changed too. My father Harold had retired from his factory job. My mother Diane had started some small cleaning service. Mason was an accountant now, married with 2 children. Lily was divorced, still living near them. They all looked so ordinary online. So respectable. If someone who didn't know the truth saw them, they'd never imagine the kind of crime buried under that surface. I realized that exposing them wouldn't just destroy their reputation. It would unravel everything they'd built their lives upon. But I didn't want to act rashly. I'd spent too many years reacting to pain. This time, I wanted to move with intention. So I started documenting. Every memory, every detail that might connect them to my kidnapping. I wrote down conversations I remembered, moments where something had felt off, like the time when I was 8 and asked for my birth certificate, and my father snapped, "Stop asking questions." Or when a woman from the local school office came by to verify records, and my mother sent me to the attic, whispering, "Stay quiet until she leaves." Back then, I thought it was just her being overprotective. Now, I saw it for what it was, fear of being found out. I made a folder on my computer labeled simply, "The Truth." Inside, I saved scans of the clippings, Evelyn's note, the DNA results, and a written timeline. I wasn't sure yet how I'd use it, but I knew I would. Still, there was one more step I needed to take before anything else. I needed to see my real parents. It took me 2 weeks to gather the courage. I emailed the Callahan Foundation again, this time under my real name, attaching the DNA report and a short message. I think it's time we meet. The reply came within hours. It was from someone named Dr. Milton, the family's legal advisor. He said Mr. and Mrs. Callahan were aware of the report and that they wished to meet me in person. The meeting was set for the following Monday. I barely slept that weekend. My heart kept imagining what it would be like, walking into a room and seeing the people who had given me life but never got to raise me. I was terrified, not because I doubted who they were, but because I didn't know who I would be to them. When the day finally came, I drove to their estate, the same one I'd seen in pictures online. It was vast but peaceful, surrounded by tall oaks and quiet lawns, the kind of place that felt suspended in time. A security guard let me in after checking my ID. As I walked up the path, I noticed how the air smelled of wet grass and jasmine. For a moment, I felt like that lost baby might still be somewhere here, waiting to come home. The door opened before I could knock. A man in his late 60s stood there, tall, with silver hair and eyes that looked like they'd known too many sleepless nights. "Sierra?" he said softly. I nodded. Yes. He didn't say another word. He just stepped forward and pulled me into a hug so strong, so trembling that I felt my knees weaken. After a few seconds, a woman appeared behind him. Elegant, graceful, her face lined with both age and sorrow. Her hands were shaking. "Helena," he whispered. "It's her." She covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. My baby. For the first time in decades, I let myself be held. Not like a burden, not like a helper, but like someone who was wanted. We cried. Quietly, the way people do when they're afraid any sound might wake them from a dream. After a while, we sat in the living room. The walls were covered with family photos of two people growing older, but always leaving a space in the middle, as if waiting for something to return. Helena held my hand. "We never gave up," she whispered. "Not once." I could hardly speak. I didn't know. They told me I was adopted. Her eyes darkened. "Who?" "My parents," I said bitterly. "The ones who raised me." Richard's jaw tightened. "Names," I told them. "Harold and Diane Turner." Helena inhaled sharply. "Diane used to come by our house. She helped the staff sometimes. We trusted her." "That's what Evelyn said," I replied. "She told me Diane took me that day." Helena looked like she was about to break. "All these years, she lived freely?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, and she made me her servant." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard spoke first, his voice low but steady. "We'll go to the police. We'll reopen the case. You'll get justice." I looked at him, this kind, broken man who had spent half his life searching for me. And I realized something. I didn't want the police to just drag them away. That would be too simple, too clean. No, I wanted them to feel it, to live with the same helplessness they'd inflicted on me. I placed my hand on his arm. "Not yet, please." He frowned. "Why not?" "Because," I said softly, "they've spent their lives pretending to be good people. I want that mask to fall slowly. I want them to watch everything crumble, piece by piece." Helena studied my face for a long time, then nodded. "You're your father's daughter," she said quietly. Strong, but deliberate. They agreed to wait. The police report would stay sealed for now, until I decided otherwise. Over the next few weeks, I began to plan. The first step was exposure, not to the world, but to them. I wanted Harold and Diane to know that I knew. I wanted to see their faces when the truth finally cornered them. I sent them a letter. No return address, just a plain envelope with one sentence inside. "I know what you did in 1993. I imagined the panic in their house when they read it. Diane pacing, Harold snapping at her, both trying to guess who might have found out. 2 days later, I sent another one. This time, I included a photocopy of the old newspaper clipping with the headline, "Infant Girl Abducted. Callahan Family Offers $10 million Reward." No explanation. No signature. Then I waited. It didn't take long. One evening, my phone rang from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Sierra," a familiar voice said, Diane's voice, but it sounded different now, shaky, nervous. "Did you send something?" I kept my tone calm. "What do you mean?" "There's someone playing a sick joke. We got these letters." "Letters?" I said, feigning confusion. "What kind of letters?" "Don't pretend you don't know." She snapped, then caught herself. "Just forget I said anything." She hung up. I smiled, calmly. For the first time in my life, she was the one losing control. Over the next week, I kept sending small reminders. A baby photo slipped under their door, a copy of my DNA result mailed anonymously, each one like a quiet knock on the door of their guilt. I didn't need to confront them yet. I wanted them to stew in fear, to feel the kind of invisible dread I'd lived with for years. Meanwhile, I stayed close to the Callahans. I visited them often, learning about their lives, their grief, their foundation's work. I realized how much goodness they had poured into the world despite their loss. One evening, Richard said, "You don't have to seek revenge, Sierra. You've already won. You survived." I smiled faintly. I didn't survive to forget. I survived to remember, and to make sure no one like them ever hurts anyone again. He nodded quietly. Still, I knew there was a line I wouldn't cross. I didn't want to become them. My revenge had to be clean. Calm, yes, but precise. That night, I drafted a long email. It was addressed to a journalist who had once covered the Callahan case. I didn't send it yet, but I attached all my evidence. I wanted it ready, a trigger waiting for the right moment. Because when the time came, I wouldn't need to shout. I'd just tell the truth, and the truth would do the rest. When I returned home from that strange and painful meeting with my real parents, everything felt heavy, like the air itself carried judgment. The drive back was silent, except for the rhythmic hum of the car tires against the road. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not because of fear, but because of the storm that was building inside me. I had spent 32 years living a lie. 32 years serving a family that had stolen me, raised me like a servant, and made me feel grateful for scraps of affection. When I walked into the house that night, my mother, I could barely call her that anymore, was sitting on the sofa with her favorite glass of wine, her legs crossed, looking as if nothing in the world could bother her. My father was in his usual chair, half asleep in front of the TV. The twins, Ryan and Olivia, were nowhere to be seen. Maybe out with friends, or perhaps avoiding me, like they often did. I stood there, looking at the two people I had once thought were my parents, and I saw them differently now. Their faces, once so familiar, looked strange. Their voices, their habits, everything about them now felt like an act in a long, cruel play. I could feel my heart pounding, the words rising in my throat like a tide. I said, quietly but firmly, "We need to talk." My mother turned her head lazily. "About what, Sierra? Did you burn dinner again?" Her tone had always been sharp. She had a way of making every word cut, like glass disguised as sugar. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About me." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, this should be interesting." I walked closer, holding my phone in my hand, the photos of the newspaper clippings still open. I turned the screen toward her. "You want to tell me why my face was on the front page of a missing child report 30 years ago?" She blinked once, then twice. For a second, her confidence cracked. But only for a second. She laughed. That fake, dry laugh I'd grown up hearing whenever she tried to dismiss something she didn't want to deal with. "Oh, Sierra," she said. "You've always been so dramatic." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't call me that name. That's not even my real name, is it?" My father stirred, muttering, "What's going on?" He looked confused, half drunk as always. I didn't give them time to recover. I opened the folder the woman at the funeral had given me. Inside were old photos, baby pictures, my birth certificate, even a note with my real parents' names. "I met someone today," I said. "At the funeral. She knew who I was. She told me the truth, that I wasn't adopted, that you took me. You kidnapped me." My mother's expression changed. There it was, fear. A quick, fleeting look that vanished under a mask of control. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said coldly. "Those people will say anything for money." "Money?" I said, my voice breaking. "You think this is about money? You stole me from my real parents. You let them grieve for decades while you made me clean your floors and wash your dishes." My father's hand shook as he reached for his drink. "She was a baby," he muttered. "She doesn't remember anything." "Stop," I shouted. "Stop pretending you don't know what you did." There was silence. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall filled the room. Then she said, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard, "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, we took you. You were supposed to be ours. Your mother, that woman, she didn't deserve you. She had everything. Money, a big house, staff, and we had nothing. We wanted a child. We deserved a child. You were convenient." Her words didn't even sound like confession. They sounded like justification. "You raised me like a slave," I whispered. "I raised you," she snapped. "You should be thanking us you even had a roof over your head. You think your fancy real parents would have made you strong? No, they would have spoiled you. We made you tough. We gave you a life." "You gave me hell," I said. I turned away before the tears could fall. I couldn't bear to look at them any longer. I went upstairs, packed a small bag, and left that house, the house I had scrubbed and polished for decades, without looking back. I drove straight to a hotel that night. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept replaying every moment of my life, every cruel remark, every chore, every time they'd made me sit on the floor while the others sat at the table. It all made sense now. They never loved me because I wasn't theirs. I was a trophy of theft, a living reminder of their cruelty. The next morning, I went to the police. I told them everything. The woman at the funeral had already given them my contact information, and the detectives had been expecting me. They took my statement, collected the documents, and told me they'd reopen the case. My biological parents, the Harrisons, were already in contact with them. For the next few days, everything happened quickly. There were DNA tests, official reports, old case files reopened after decades. The police came to question the people I once called family. When they were taken in for questioning, I didn't go. I couldn't. I just sat in the car outside the station, watching from a distance. A part of me wanted to run in there and scream at them. Another part wanted to just drive away and never look back. But what I really wanted, what I needed, was peace. Revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about taking my life back. A week later, the results came in. It was confirmed. I was the missing Harrison girl. The DNA matched perfectly. I was their daughter. When the officers told me, I didn't cry. I just sat there quietly. There was something strangely calm about knowing the truth, even when it hurt so much. The news spread quickly. Reporters came, stories resurfaced online, old photos of me as a toddler were everywhere. My parents, my real ones, came to meet me officially at the station. My mother couldn't stop crying. My father looked like he'd aged 20 years overnight. When they hugged me, it felt strange at first, like I was hugging strangers. But then something inside me softened. I realized that all the love I had ever wanted had been waiting for me, searching for me, all along. The next few weeks were overwhelming. There were interviews, investigations, even legal proceedings. My kidnappers, the couple who had raised me, were charged with child abduction and abuse. The twins avoided me completely. I heard that Ryan had fled to another city, and Olivia was pretending nothing happened, as if it was all some tabloid rumor. But I didn't care anymore. For the first time in my life, I had people who loved me, not because I was useful, not because I was quiet and obedient, but because I was me. Still, healing wasn't instant. There were nights I woke up crying, confused about who I was supposed to be. I'd sit by the window, staring at the moon, wondering if I could ever truly belong anywhere again. One evening, my real mother, Grace, came into my room. She sat beside me, holding a box. Inside were things from my childhood. A blanket, a small silver bracelet with my real name engraved, Sierra Lily Harrison. She said, "We kept everything, hoping one day you'd come home." That broke me. I sobbed in her arms for what felt like hours. After that night, something changed inside me. I began to rebuild. I started therapy, began reconnecting with my real family, and slowly started working at the Harrison Foundation, my father's nonprofit organization that supported missing children and their families. It felt meaningful, like I was turning my pain into something that mattered. But beneath the calm surface, a quiet determination brewed. My kidnappers had lived comfortably for decades. They had a big house, expensive cars, and all of it, every comfort, was built on a stolen life. My life. So I decided that justice wouldn't end with their arrest. It would end when every single lie they built came crashing down. That was when the real revenge began. Not loud, not violent, but calm, calculated, and utterly devastating. When everything went public, it didn't explode the way movies make it look. There were no dramatic confrontations on the courthouse steps, no viral videos of me screaming in the faces of the people who raised me. Instead, it was slow, legal, and utterly relentless, like water wearing away stone. That was what made it effective. I wanted consequence, not spectacle. I had carefully prepared for this. The folder I'd started, The Truth, had become a dossier. It included the old newspaper clippings, Evelyn's statements, my DNA report, copies of forged documents I'd obtained through a lawyer, dates, times, witnesses. I'd hired an attorney who specialized in cold cases and family law. Someone level-headed who understood the difference between righteous anger and a cheap headline. We planned each move to make sure the facts could not be rewritten. The first step was criminal. The district attorney reopened the investigation, and within weeks, arrests were made. Harold and Diane, the people who had called themselves my parents, were charged with child abduction, falsifying documents, and multiple counts of child neglect and psychological abuse. It was cold comfort to hear those charges read aloud. The law moved slowly, and for some things the statutes had long since run their course. Still, there were enough counts that would stick. But criminal charges carry their own limits. I knew that. Arrests could lead to prison sentences, but they wouldn't repair the years stolen from me. So we filed a civil suit as well. The suit sought restitution for the emotional and economic cost of those years I had worked without pay under the pretense of family obligation. It asked for compensation for lost schooling, lost wages, the damage to my sense of self. There was heat and shame when the initial papers were served. Suddenly, their neighbors who had exchanged polite greetings for decades found themselves reading headlines that described how the tidy young couple next door had once been involved in a crime that ruined a family's life. The media came in waves, some gentle, some merciless. I made a decision early on to control what I could. I would speak only when necessary, and then plainly. I did a short interview with the journalist I'd prepared the dossier for. I told my story without theatrics, sticking to facts and feelings in equal measure. The years of being invisible, the small kindnesses my grandfather had shown, the moment in the cemetery when a stranger pressed a folded envelope into my hand. People listened. Many were quietly horrified. Some were angry in ways that surprised me, toward the system that failed the Callahans, toward the social circles that accepted appearances over truth. The court process eventually brought my abductors face to face with the consequences of their choices. When I saw Diane in the courtroom, she looked smaller than I'd imagined, less a matriarch than a frightened woman hiding behind an old habit of sarcasm. Harold, who'd seemed bulky and unbothered in family photos, was gaunt, as if the years of pretending had hollowed him out. The twins refused to look at me. They sat with their hands folded, eyes fixed on the table as if the world could be made tidy by ignoring it. Testimony was surgical. Evelyn, the housekeeper from the Callahan estate, took the stand. She described what happened the day the baby disappeared, how a woman had come under the pretense of babysitting and then vanished with the child. Her voice was steady but small when she pointed to photographs that identified Diane as the woman who had visited the Callahan home. Other witnesses, surprised after years of silence, corroborated small but important details. A pattern of unexplained absences, a falsified medical record, payments that made no sense. Our legal team had been relentless about following breadcrumbs. We had uncovered bank transfers made to accounts set up under aliases, receipts for baby supplies bought in cash and shipped out of state. It was all ordinary, painstaking evidence, but it added up. The judge issued a sentence that was neither merciful nor cruel. Appropriate, I suppose, for what had been an appropriated life. Harold and Diane faced years of legal consequence. Prison wouldn't give me back my childhood, but it would be a public accounting for their choices. The twins, who had benefited indirectly from the life built on my disappearance, were also held accountable in the civil suit. They lost certain positions that depended on reputation. One of the twins had a small business that relied on local contracts, and several clients withdrew after the story came out. Reputation, once peeled away, can be ruinous. That ruin was quiet and slow. I had intentionally avoided theatrics, because the best revenge, to me, was to let the truth dismantle them at a reasonable, unstoppable pace. People who appeared respectable in grocery store lines and PTA meetings couldn't hide from legal documents, depositions, and the stain of public record. Friends I'd thought would defend them fell silent. Others reached out, embarrassed they had never asked deeper questions. The neighborhood's polite facade cracked. Even as legal wheels turned, I focused on my own repair. I began therapy with someone who knew trauma and identity work. Saying the words, "I was kidnapped," required a kind of courage I didn't realize I'd been carrying. In therapy, I learned how to own the stolen pieces of me without letting them become my entire definition. I learned to separate the child I'd been, scared, hungry for approval, from the woman I was becoming, resolute, cautious, and kind by choice rather than obligation. The Callahans were gentle anchors through this. My reunion with them had been the single most disorienting and anchoring thing I'd ever experienced. There were awkward moments, holiday dinners where I felt like an intruder in a life that had continued in my absence. But they were patient. My mother's hands shook when she handed me old mementos. My father's voice often broke mid-sentence. They were kind in the way of people who have loved through grief. Careful, deliberate, full of remorse for years they couldn't get back. We worked together to turn the spotlight toward something constructive. The Callahan Foundation, which had long supported missing persons cases, became my new professional home. I started with volunteer hours, helping review old case notes, cataloging archive material, contacting families who'd lost children years ago. There was a practical serenity to this work. It allowed me to use the pain I'd lived through to try and prevent it for others. It also felt like reclaiming something that had been ripped away. The right to contribute, to be someone who mattered beyond household chores. One of the more complicated parts of revenge was the personal. My biological mother, Grace, asked if I wanted to confront Harold and Diane myself. I thought about it long and hard. There was a deep temptation to go to them and force them to look at the years through my eyes. But I knew what I wanted most. Not a display, but a steady, lasting change. So I declined a dramatic face-off. Instead, I wrote a letter. It was not cruel. It was not pleading. It was very simple. You stole more than a child. You stole time. I am taking it back. That letter was delivered via our lawyers, and they received it in the quiet of a prison visiting room. I didn't chase photos. I didn't want them to have anything from me that could be turned into a headline. The letter was for them to carry in their private conscience. There were moments of paradox in this new life. The twins, their own children now grown, avoided me, their lives subtly altered by a past they had chosen to ignore. Some days I felt pity for them. Other days I felt nothing. I forgave, in the sense that I stopped sharpening my heart into a weapon aimed only at them. Forgiveness, I discovered, was less about them and more about me not carrying extra weight. Reconstruction wasn't only emotional. We pursued legal avenues to secure some form of restitution. The civil suit resulted in a judgment that transferred a portion of the assets the family had accumulated to a trust dedicated to education and therapy for survivors of child abduction and abuse. It felt fitting to pull resources that had once been used to create a false family and redirect them toward healing real ones. The judge approved a plan that required supervised restitution payments and a fund to support outreach. It was practical, not vindictive. That was the point. There were smaller, private moments that mattered more than any headline. I went back to the cemetery where my grandfather's funeral had been held. I sat on the same bench under the same gray sky and let the memory of that whisper wash over me. I left a small note tucked under a stone. "Thank you for the cookie under the table. I found you." It was silly and private and perfect. As months became a year, life settled into a different rhythm. I found routines I loved. Morning walks through the park where the light hit the trees in a way that made my heart unclench. Late-night calls with my real mother where we traded recipes and silly stories, and work at the foundation that felt purposeful. The anger that had been a living thing inside of me softened into vigilance. I was careful, yes, but not imprisoned by the past anymore. One day, a journalist asked me whether I felt vindicated. I answered honestly, vindication is small. Justice is procedural. What I feel is whole in ways I never thought possible. I reclaimed my name and my life. That is enough. There was no gloating in my voice, just a steady, quiet truth. Revenge had been about restoring balance, not about matching cruelty with cruelty. It had been about patience and planning, using the systems that exist to make wrongdoing visible and accountable. It had been about turning the resources and attention created by my resurfacing into something that would help others. I hadn't become someone I didn't recognize to deliver justice. I had become myself, and that perhaps was the deepest revenge, to live fully and without apology. Years later, I sometimes meet with families at the foundation. I listen to parents whose nights are long and silent. I sit with children who are learning to trust adults again. Sometimes I tell parts of my story, but mostly I listen. The truth I learned at that funeral, the small folded envelope, Evelyn's whisper, still astonishes me for its odd, improbable tenderness. The woman who handed me those clippings didn't change my life in a single moment. She set a slow current in motion. There are still days I feel the old phantom of the family maid. Old habits from long servitude take time to shed. But now they are just shadows, easily dismissed. I am Sierra Lily Harrison. I have a name that's mine. I have people who love me not because they benefit, but because they choose to. If there's one thing I hope this story gives you, it's this. Truth matters, and it can be patient. It doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with a folded piece of paper handed in a cemetery, and sometimes it comes with a lawyer's careful files. But when truth finds its way, it can unravel the most stubborn of lies. If you found this story meaningful, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to my Calm Revenge for more stories told quietly, honestly, and with care. Your support helps bring more voices forward, stories of reclaiming, not spectacle. Thank you for listening.